You guys are the ones that check that channel link.
Yes. All right, everybody. Welcome to the show here. This is Sam Shankland and Dan Narodetsky. We're a couple grandmasters from California and 0 viewers. We are talking into the ether right now.
Yep. But hopefully people are going to join us soon enough.
So 0 viewers. Make a new tab.
Yeah, we're
YouTube.
Here. Live
12 watching, it seems.
12 watching.
I think it's just 12 viewers on the Google Hangouts, not on the actual. I think it's there
we go. Yeah, we got some people. Yeah.
All right, so we had some technical difficulties to get started. Looks like people are here. Can everyone hear us? Hi from Mexico. Hi from North Korea. Nice to see you.
Yep. And Pyongyang Center for Video Recording.
Yes. So can everyone hear us?
Just need one person to confirm. That's all we need.
All right,
there we go.
Cool.
Yes, good.
So we're going to get started today, and we're going to continue along with the same theme of looking at the recent games from St. Louis Rapid and Blitz, but we're going to tie them into our series as well and how they work. So I think before anything else, we can just check out another Kasparov game. I mean,
yeah,
the guy's back. It's great to see him. But before we do that, I'd just like to point out why we are here. We're here to promote our video bundle. So 15-hour video series, the Shankland method, and Daniel has a 15-hour video series, the Narodetsky method. And these are now being sold in a bundle for just $79 for 30 hours of total instruction. Normally they're $120 each. Here for 79 bucks, you can get both of them. So I'm just going to post a link down in here below so you guys can know what to do about that. And so you're certainly going to want to buy this because Daniel needs the money. He's a starving college student.
Yeah, I know. I need money.
He's living off of top ramen, and that just won't stand. In any case, the link is down there in the description. I also just copied it into the chat. So without further ado, we're going to get started. So the first game we're going to look at is one that came from the St. Louis Rapid and Blitz, and this is a game between 2 old-time veterans in Kasparov and Anand. Application window, Anand Kasparov. So it started off as a Sicilian, which anyone who follows Kasparov chess is fully aware is his real deal. But what I'd like to talk about in this game is how this sort of translates to my series. So just to talk about a bit what I was doing is my series is about using concrete calculation as a positional tool. And the most common way you can do that is once you have identified the positional goal that you're trying to achieve, if your opponent is preventing you from doing it, either by sort of directly stopping it or by some tactical resource or by threatening something bigger, the first thing you should always be asking yourself is what happens if I do it anyway? And I think Kasparov very successfully asked himself that question in this game. So without further ado, I'd like to present it. So knight f3, d6, bishop b5 check. So
this elicited some eye rolls from Kasparov, if I remember correctly.
Oh, really?
He was really looking forward to the opportunity to play his vintage Najdorf. And
with Anand.
Anand was a bit of a party spoiler, but
they had lots of good Najdorf fights back in the day.
Yeah.
But in any case, they got to a pretty standard Najdorf structure because white played d4, which is not the main move these days. Normally he's trying to play c3 and d4 and sort of play like a Roy Lopez. But in this game, it started as follows. And a6, knight c3, e5, queen d3, and Kasparov played h6. And if I recall, I actually think this is an inaccurate move. I believe rook c8 is best because, and Anand really points out why, is he immediately does knight d2. The point of this move is he wants to play knight c4 and then follow that up with knight e3 to put maximum pressure on the weak d5 square. And the whole point of h6, which black would like to play the move knight f6 without allowing bishop g5. He doesn't want to leave himself with 2 knights against 2 bishops because both of his bishops are not super impressive, and the knights have the great d5 square. So by playing h6, he's adding more firepower there. But given that white is going to play knight d2 anyway, I believe, for example, let's say we have a variation like rook c8, knight d2. If black were to play, I don't know, bishop e7, knight c4, queen c7, knight e3, and now knight f6, black was able to avoid wasting a move with h6. In any case, that's sort of modern day theory, and this kind of thing is, I think, one of the reasons Kasparov was suffering at least a little bit. But in any case, Kasparov played h6, which can't be so terrible. Knight b2, bishop e6, knight c4, and knight e3. So Anand has spent quite a bit of time. He's just spent 3 moves getting his f3 knight to to e3, but the knight on e3 is extremely well placed because he's sort of slamming down on the d5 square. So, Daniel, you're a Najdorf player. What is Black's main positional idea in these structures?
Well, generally wants to play on the queen side. I mean, there's b5, b4, which is one idea. There's usually some exchange sacks in the air hanging around on c3.
Do you think there'll be sacks on c3 in this kind of position?
Probably not. I mean, I can envision some sort of situation where Black has a knight on f6. But of course, he'd like to play d5 and liberate himself of this pawn.
Right. Well, d5 seems like a very far-fetched dream here, doesn't it?
Obviously, yeah. I mean, because one thing I if I may, quickly mention, the one thing I talk about in my series is sensing the key to the position, which can be a hard thing to do. I think a lot of people look at a position and they're very aimless. They're not sure what they're accomplishing. And here, because Anand has that clamp on the d5 square, he's really felt the key to the position. He's made it very difficult for Kasparov to get his things going. Was b5 before you were looking for, Sam? Is the main plan?
d5 I think
d5,
is what Black would like to play if at all possible.
Right.
b5, b4 definitely is a thought, but I think Black's a bit too slow to do.
It's vanilla here. It's too,
After b5, I think White can immediately slam with a4. And here we're sort of seeing this rook on c8 is suddenly misplaced. It'd kind of be happier on a8 because the pawn on a6 is hanging, the pawn on b4 is hanging, and Black has all sorts of concrete
and again, that
problems.
d5 square really kills Black here. Like, he can't move.
Right. So another thing I was saying that actually our series will complement themselves very well if Daniel is saying his series has a lot to do with sensing what the key to the position is. Well, mine is sort of figuring out once you know what the key is, you have to use tactical resources to try to accomplish it. So it sounds like it really could work well together. In any case, Kasparov played knight f6.
It's almost as if there's a bundle that exists.
Yeah,
I mean,
wouldn't
that be great?
Yeah, that would be, wouldn't it? Lucky for you guys, there is. So Kasparov played knight f6. This obviously is a natural move. He wants to develop his king side before doing anything else. So castle, bishop e7. And now rook d1. White is really putting maximum pressure on the d5 square. So Black castles. I believe White played a4 here. At this point, I think Black is serious enough about b5 that it should be prevented. For instance, the best way for White to develop his piece is to play bishop d2, bishop e1, and then f3, bishop f2, where the bishop will be very well placed. Normally, the bishop is already on the diagonal because the knight is occupying the e3 square. It takes White a little while to get there. And he's banking on Black not having much counterplay and not being able to punish him. So I believe Anand played a4 here. No, he started with bishop d2. I guess he wasn't scared of b5 just yet. But pretty soon he played a4. So, yeah, a4 here. So here, d5 is Black's main idea. It's what I was hoping we were going to get, the answer I was hoping to get out of Daniel, and it's certainly one of the things he mentioned. So one of the things I talk about a lot in my series is once you've figured out what your main idea is and your opponent is stopping you from doing so, your first question should always be, what happens if I do it anyway? So let's see if any of my viewers here can figure out, can Black get away with playing d5 in this position? Come on, people, we need answers. Can Black play d5 or not? Please support your idea with concrete variations. Okay, so Ivan Stanislavovich says no because of b4. That's one very decent point. But unfortunately, I think this actually does work for Black. If he plays d5, if White were to play b4, which is attempting to dislodge this rook and then take on d5, here, Black is able to play rook takes c3.
There's that exchange sacrifice.
Right. Well, in this case, it's not even a sacrifice because
it's
Black
winning
is
material,
Yeah, I'm not actually sure Black is doing that great here after something like d4, bishop takes d4. White's going to have some very good pawns here. But White has but this idea from Ivan is very close to correct. Essentially, White needs to get rid of this rook on c5 in some case, and I think the best way to do that is to actually take on d5 first. And here, after knight takes d5, White can take with either knight on d5, and he is winning. For instance, if knight takes d5 here, White can choose between bishop e3 or b4. In either case, White is going to win material and the game. So he also can take back with this knight and have the same thing. Either b4 or bishop b4 should just be winning on the spot. So as it turns out, Black would really love to play d5. The first question he should ask himself is, what happens if I just do it? Here, the answer is he loses. Now, because you should always be asking yourself this question doesn't mean you should always pull the trigger, but it does mean you should be considering it. So d5 does not seem to work just yet. So Kasparov continued along with queen c8, which seems like quite a natural move. He's bringing his queen to a nice active square and preparing for his rook to come to d8. So white dropped his bishop back to e1, putting more pressure on the d5 square, trying to prevent d5 once again. Rook d8, and now Anand played b4, which I was a little surprised by during the game, but I suppose it has some merit. So rook c7, and now white played a5. And if my guess is Anand is hoping to play the move knight c to d5 next. For example, if Kasparov played bishop f8, which I think is a reasonably common move in these structures, and white plays knight c d5, after something like takes, the bishop is forced to d7, and after c4, white has pretty good pressure on the queen side. This is still not a clear position because black has counterplay with f5, but my guess is this is what Anand had in mind.
Yeah, maybe f5, c5, and then you start...
Yeah, f5, c5, bishop b5, queen takes f5, d takes c5. It gets very complicated, but my guess is Anand had something like this in mind. But so Kasparov did not want to allow his bishop to become passive and instead played bishop c4. And the point of this move is it might seem a little strange to give up such a good bishop, but now because he's trading it for this knight, here the knight on c3 is very unstable, and the pawn on e4 is also hanging, which is going to become very relevant. The pawn on b4 is also hanging, and so if white were to try knight d5, the knight will be captured and then c2 will hang. Otherwise, rook takes b4 is a threat, and this is not what white wants. So white simply retreated his queen. So let's stop here once again. We've already established what the main idea for black is in this position. And we've sort of asked ourselves previously what happens if he just plays d5. Here, d5, in the last position, d5, actually black had enough defenders, but there were tactical resources available that made it impossible. In this position, if black were to play d5, white has too many attackers on that square. Black will lose a pawn. But this is where the whole point of my series comes into play. d5 is black's main positional idea. Here it seems impossible because white has too many defenders of that square. The first question you should ask yourself is what happens if I play it anyway? So I'd like everyone to calculate as best they can and see if they can figure out if black can get away with playing the move d5 here. So who all thinks black can play d5? So someone says c2 will be lost. If that being the case, maybe d5 is possible to happen. So Valentin, do you think that d5 is playable, or are you not sure? Yes, d5 indeed can be played. So it has to be calculated, and that's really what my series is about, is calculating concrete lines when trying to justify positional goals. We've already sort of explained that d5 is the goal here. We didn't ask people to figure this out on their own, but that's really more what Daniel's series is about. My series is about once you've figured out what your goal is, how do you try to achieve it? So here there's some concrete variations. Obviously the pawn on d5 is going to get taken, but the question is with what? The easiest is if white were to play e takes d5. This is met by a very nasty move that will leave black probably just winning, but I'd like to give everyone a chance to try to find it. What should black play here?
Don't overcomplicate it. It's one of the things that I've mentioned a few times in my series. Sometimes,
bishop into b4, equalizing material on the spot, leaving white in a dreadful pin that he's going to have a very hard time escaping. And now d5 will probably fall as well, and black will end up at least a pawn ahead and probably more.
Yeah, knight e4 is also a threat. It's terrible.
Yeah, there's a lot of nice tactics available. For instance, if white tries to dislodge this bishop. As Daniel pointed out, knight e4 is winning on the spot. Even if it wasn't, black would have bishop c3 and then bishop to a2, winning material on the spot. So there's all sorts of problems white is facing. So it's pretty easy in this position to realize that e takes d5 is not going to work. The other captures are much more serious. For instance, in the game, white played knight c takes d5. But let's first start with knight e takes d5. Here, black has, this is not too hard to calculate because the lines are very forced, but black plays bishop takes d5. He could also probably bishop takes b4 is too much because if knight takes f6, yeah, that just loses on the spot. But after bishop takes d5 here, it turns out, unfortunately for white, he's going to be losing one of his pawns directly. Because if he takes with the pawn on d5, black will play bishop takes b4 and white can resign. And if he takes with the knight on d5, at the end of all of this, black takes on c2, equalizing material and breaking out of any potential hazards. Probably, I don't know if black is better here. I would probably prefer his position, but it's maybe closer to equal. I don't know what Daniel thinks. But.
Yeah, it seems like a nice initiative, but definitely not worse. I mean, something like queen d3, worst comes to worst, black can even play queen c4, offer a queen trade, and it's just very solid. Those pawns on b4 and a5 might become a little tender in the end game.
So these were reasonably simple to figure out, but the move a non-played in the game, knight c takes d5, is the toughest. And here, when I was first watching, I thought, oh, well, black simply grabs the pawn back on e4, and now this queen has to go away, and after bishop takes d5, the pawn on c2 is hanging. But this overlooks a basic tactic, so who all can point out what I missed and hopefully would not have played if I had been in Anand's chair? What should white play here? Knight e7 indeed, and black is completely lost. He's going to lose a gross amount of material. Rook takes e7 and queen takes d8.
Yeah, and he can actually save the bishop with rook e8, but he'll still be down a full rook in the endgame.
Yeah, that is not interesting. So the question is, well, what could Kasparov have in mind? Because the game continues knight takes d5 instead, and it seems like material is just going to be lost, but as we'll see, Kasparov has another idea. After e takes d5, right now white is up a pawn, but black can win it back with a precise move. Let's see if anybody can figure out what black should play here. Bishop c5 is not a good idea. That hangs two bishops in one. But bishop g5 is correct. So essentially what right now is the pawn on d5 is white's extra pawn, but it's a little bit loose because it's only defended by this knight. And once black can remove the knight, and no, Ivan Stanislavovich, you're not bad
You've
at chess.
suggested several correct moves. We'll
Yes.
call this a typo. You meant bishop g5, obviously.
Yes, of course. And in the meantime, one mistake never makes you bad at chess. After bishop g5, though, now white is unable to support this pawn on d5 any further, and if black is ready to play rook takes d5 next. So if black could play rook takes d5 and maintain the bishop pair, he will be much better. But unfortunately, he can't do that because white plays d6. And now after rook d7, it's very clear that this pawn is badly overextended in white's position, and it will simply drop off. But unfortunately for black, he's unable to maintain the bishop pair because after queen c3, the bishop on c4 is hanging, and if the bishop were to move away to try to get the absolute maximum from the position, unfortunately after queen takes e5, the computer even gave queen takes c8, but queen takes e5 looks a little bothersome. Maybe bishop f6 is actually good, but in any case, let's even go with the simple move, queen c8, rook c8. Here black is not necessarily going to win back the pawn on d6. So in the game, Kasparov had to cede the bishop pair because of the threat of knight takes c4, but after bishop takes e3, he was able to take this pawn on d6, equalizing material. And now white did grab the pawn on e5, but it wasn't a very important pawn because the presence of opposite colored bishops increases drawing chances. But more importantly, because the structure is such where the c4 square is so firmly blockaded, White's extra pawn is going absolutely nowhere. All of black's pieces are nice and active, and indeed the game was drawn in just a couple more moves. Queen c6, queen c5, and I'm compelled to play. Already here, a move like rook g6 followed by bishop d5 is a threat. There's all sorts of reasons that this could be unpleasant for white if he tries too hard to hold on to his pawn. So Anand played queen c5 just to trade queens, but after queen takes c5, all of this is just obviously a draw with the opposite bishops and even pawns. There's really not much more to play for. But we saw that what Kasparov did here was he used concrete variations to justify his positional goal of accomplishing d5. As such, he broke out of the bind, did not have to subject himself to a passive defense, and he equalized quite easily. So this is the kind of thing that I talk about a lot in my series. I'm going to show another Kasparov game later in this webinar about this kind of chess, which it's funny because I think it's very calculation-intensive chess, but it's not like you're seeing, pieces hanging everywhere or, checkmates in the air all over the place. It's a much more positionally grounded way of playing, but using very direct calculation. And I think this is what makes really elite players as strong as they are. In any case, I'll get to another Kasparov game later, but I think for now I'd like to switch to a bit of Daniel's course, and he's selected a game from his course that he's going to show you guys. So let me just close this.
Yep.
We will stop this and choose another thing to share.
Right now you can entertain ourselves with our faces.
Yes, and while we're waiting, I'm just going to remind you guys why we're all here, that we're here to promote our series, the Shanklin method and the Narodetsky method. The link to buy it at a very steep discount, $79 just for the two courses, even when they're both normally $120. I'm just typing it into the chat now. It's also in the description of the webinar, and we really hope you buy it and that you can improve your chess a lot. So in any case, I'd like to pass the mouse over to Daniel so he can show the game that he wanted to present to you guys. And
thank you, Sam.
There you go.
Very good. So yeah, before I get onto the actual game, just a couple of words about my series, what it's all about. As Sam hinted while he was presenting the Kasparov game, I do talk a lot about kind of annoying positional themes that a lot of players don't always kind of intuitively understand. But really the overarching theme of my course is I wanted to take all of these really annoying concepts that are quite poorly covered in chess literature, and I wanted to give them the coverage that they deserved. So my series covers a very wide berth in terms of topics. I talk about openings. I talk about things like how do you choose an opening repertoire when you're an ambitious player? How do you deal with the massive influx of opening resources, and how do you choose between, for example, one opening book after another? I talk about things like how to study the opening. I talk about a lot of subtle positional themes that are critically important and yet that get fairly poor coverage, once again, in a lot of chess literature. So, I really put my heart and soul into the video series, and I drew on a lot of my experience talking to players, and I really tried to cull the things that a lot of my own students and a lot of the players I worked with were complaining to me about, things that they were mentioning that they really struggle with and that they couldn't find enough resources to improve. So without further ado, I'd like to present one of the games that I show in my video series on my chapter on positional intuition. So I spent a fair amount of time discussing intuition, which I think a lot of us, kind of, no pun intended, intuitively understand what intuition is. And yet a lot of us struggle with it, and a lot of us struggle with finding techniques to improve your intuitive thinking. So before we actually get on to the business of looking at this game, a more general question, which might seem pretty stupid, but nonetheless, I think it's a good bridge toward this game. Can somebody try to, in the chat, provide a pretty succinct definition of what exactly intuition is? So I know that people are quite enthusiastic about trying to find the move here, but first and foremost, what exactly is intuition? How do you define it?
I don't know this one. I'd like to see what you guys have to say.
Yeah,
also.
it's actually a lot more difficult than one would think.
Well, Daniel, my intuition tells me to play rook takes e6 here.
That's precisely, I see how you became a GM. Sam.
Yeah,
rook takes
I want
e6.
to take your
positional sacrifice.
What sacrifice? My intuition is you won't see that this rook is hanging.
Yeah, I'll play rook takes d4. okay, Mondo Strat is pretty close. Stuff you know without thinking. Gut feeling, no concrete lines. Yeah, I think that's right. That's about right. One of the paradoxes is there's really no kind of direct definition. I think it just means being able to sense the nature of the position and being able to sense the right direction of thinking without actually doing a lot of concrete calculation. So I talk about this a lot in my video series. And this game that I'm about to show you, it was a game that I played. I was playing the black pieces here against a very strong Grandmaster, Alexander Onishuk. We were playing in the 2015 U.S. Closed Championship, which occurred in St. Louis, the same chess mecca where Garry Kasparov just recently made his comeback. And this game really taught me a lot about the art of intuitive thinking, especially with regards to positional themes. So it's white to move here. This tournament was not going particularly well for me. But having reached this position with black, I was quite hopeful that I'd be able to escape with a draw, because let's say that white makes a move like rook e to d3, for example, just safeguarding that pawn on d4. I'm not going to actually make the move because I'm afraid it'll reveal the correct one. But imagine in your head that white just plays rook e to d3. What is my idea here with black? And you can think about, yeah, so e4 is not a legal move in this position. So the question is, after white plays rook e to d3, what was my idea? How am I going to liberate my position? Yeah, Bulent Kirka, you're basically right. E5 and Mondo Strat is right as well. So specifically after rook e to d3, black can play e5. That is inaccurate for a reason that we're about to see. But my main idea was to play c5. And this is also true if white plays rook to b3. I want to play c5. And in addition to kind of liberating my position and undermining that weak rook on d1, I'm forcing the trade of bishops. And then the rook ending is going to be basically equal. After we find the correct move, I'm going to show those lines pretty quickly. And one of the things that I mention in this series is that a very important thing to do in a lot of positions, which I call them undefined positions, positions in which, you know, you look at it and it might not be very easy to immediately spot the correct idea. There are some positions which are calculationally difficult. You can see the right idea, but it's very hard to put A and B and C together. And I think, not to put words in your mouth, Sam, but you tackle a lot of those positions, which are very complex, and it's hard to make things work.
Yes, definitely.
And I tackle some positions where, given the correct idea, it's easy to calculate, but it's hard to actually see the correct idea. But the first thing that you have to do is to diagnose the situation. Black wants to play c5. So where does that lead you? Where does that lead your intuition? In Chess Philosopher, you exactly have the right intuition. Onishuk played a brilliant move, c4 to c5. And this might seem absurd given that it's an endgame. White's just giving up that pawn on d4. But in fact, it's an incredibly powerful move, really a brilliant move that made a big impression on me. Obviously, I was pretty upset to see it once I put 2 and 2 together. But after the game, it really made an impression on me. So Onishuk plays c5, kind of a double exclam move. Just to quickly show, let's see here. Let me move the mouse maybe to this side. So if rook e to d3, I would have played c5 here. And after something like bishop takes, rook takes, I mean, white's probably nominally better, but I can go like rook takes d3, rook takes d3, rook c8, and equalize. A couple of you suggested after rook e to d3 to play e5. Could somebody point out why this move would be a little bit inaccurate?
A lot inaccurate.
A lot inaccurate, yeah. So Ivan Stanislavovich, yeah, d5 I wouldn't be too concerned about. I'd take on d5 with my pawn, and my bishop would be playing. I guess after c takes d5, I can simply play king f8. The position's about equal. Yeah, f5, and white needs to be thinking quite hard about equality there. So it's not d5. But given what we just saw, where does your intuition lead here? Come on, guys. So black wants to liberate that bishop eventually.
How can we bury the bishop on A8 on a permanent basis? Dig its grave and really shovel the dirt on top of it.
A6, maybe.
It's a good move.
It's a good move. It's a thought, but it's not the directest way of doing so. Very good. August Biachi Jr. and Ivan Stanislavovich. Yeah, C5, nothing changes here. And the point is, we'll see this very soon in the game, but in a position of this sort, even if I retake with the rook, and now he plays A6, creating a bishop on A8 that is really one for the ages. And I'll tell a quick story once we actually transition to the game. But black is really dead here. He can basically resign despite his extra pawn. And we'll get to that in a second. So that is why E5 was inaccurate. And here I would have played C5 and precisely C5. So in the game, Onishuk played C5, giving up this pawn on D4. And now he makes another very classy move. So the bishop wants to get out via B7. You can play A6, and that would be fine, but that gives my rook on D4 a little bit too much life.
After A6, would you be playing rook A4?
I would be considering that, rook A4 and giving up that bishop. I'm still lost, but I can get a couple of pawns on it.
Yes.
G6, a little bit too tactical. It doesn't stop me from playing bishop B7. Vadim, yeah, very good. Rook B3, very classy Russian-style move. Not being hasty with A6. One other thing that I talked about, not hurrying in the endgame with making the obvious moves, because A6 might have allowed me the possibility to give up the bishop in semi-desperation. But a position like this is probably winning for white, but there's no need to allow an option like this.
It's winning, but could you?
I could play rook A5 first. Yeah, I guess.
I'm not confident this is winning, actually.
Yeah, definite chances. Bishop E4, G6. Then I'm going to take that pawn on C5. It'll be awfully difficult to break.
You probably should take on C6 and only then play bishop E4, but still.
But now you need to defend this pawn,
F4.
and I'm going to put my rook on C7, I guess.
This could very well be a draw.
Yeah, I mean, and so you get burned for these sort of hasty moments. So Onishuk makes a very classy move, rook B3. Now, of course, rook A4 comes with lots of tempo, and it's quite absurd. So he plays rook D. I have to play rook D8. And now what move does he make? So you guys already know what the key to the position is. If that bishop on A8 remains out of the game, then it's literally going to be rook and bishop against rook. Yeah, very good. A6. And at this point, rumor has it that Anish Giri, top super GM, actually tweeted, "I wish I were Alexander Onishuk today." Now, reading that tweet after I lost this very painful game was not the most, was not the brightest experience of my life, but I think he hits a point here. If you look at that bishop on A8 very closely, it really creates a positional impression here, because despite the extra pawn, there's no need for any calculation here. And I think that's where this concept of intuition really comes in. A lot of people would look at this position, they would notice that bishop on A8, which is completely and totally buried for all of eternity. But they might say, well, okay, it's an endgame after all, and black is up a pawn. So we need to calculate further. We actually need to find a forced win here. And that's impossible to do, because white needs to demonstrate a little bit of finesse in order to win the game. But my point in that chapter is that a lot of intuition is this ability to figure out when you don't need to calculate anymore, when you can look at a position and intuitively evaluate it to be in your favor. And if you look closely at that bishop on A8 and you notice that white is literally playing up a piece, the only role that bishop is serving is defending C6. And it's not doing that.
I don't think white would even want to take C6 if he had the option.
Exactly.
You take the C6 pawn off the board, black might be close to drawing this game.
So it's literally completely lost for black. And he won the game quite easily. I'm going to show the remainder of the game. I played king f8, trying to advance my king and shore up all of the holes in my position. But here Onishuk continued in very nice style. Can somebody tell me what is kind of a tempting tactical way to try to win? Yeah, Richard Sorensen suggests a very healthy plan. Onishuk basically did that. But if you were tactically crazy Mikhail Tal copycat or attempted copycat, what move would you be tempted to make here? I'll pull, yeah, very good. Rook b7. I don't normally like to ask you to find bad moves, but this is an exception. So why is this a bad move? Because my point is bishop takes b7, a takes b7. My plan is simple. I'm going to take on c6 and advance that pawn.
But these guys are under control. And rook b7, I'll just point out, is not an exchange sacrifice. It's a rook sacrifice.
Yeah, because there's no bishop on a. It's not even a bishop.
Yes, it's a full rook. It is not an exchange.
Yep. So how does black stop the pawns? Yeah, Vadim says no, but no what? give me some chess moves.
No, sir.
Rook b8, very good. Rook b8, bishop takes c6, king e7, and I don't know what the evaluation is. My guess is
completely winning.
Yeah.
Black is dead winning here.
Yeah, he's just going to put his king on c7, like let's say bishop e4.
No, don't even bother. Play a5.
Yeah, a5, a4, and the game is just over. The rook is completely free to move about. It's going to put itself on d8, and the king won't even be able to stop the pawn. Good. So another point that I make is that, kind of hinted at this in the last game, I mean, sometimes simplicity is the best way to go. Sometimes, yeah, Sam.
Sorry,
what were you going to say something?
No.
Okay, sometimes simplicity is the way to go. Sometimes these tactical solutions, which look very flashy, can actually cost you a lot of points. So you need to evaluate them very soberly rather than fall prey to their appearance. Onishuk plays bishop e4. I play the move f5. He takes on Passan. Rook h3, threatening to penetrate via h7 or h8. I played king g8, very naively hoping for the move rook h7, which would be met by what?
There's going to be a lag, so they don't see it yet, but as soon as they do, it'll all come spamming out all of them at once. Okay, so there's one, there's two, there's going to be a third right away. Okay, yeah.
Good, f5. F5, so white can probably hold the draw here after rook takes a7. In fact, something like rook c7, but that would be quite a sad product. Instead of this, Onishuk, of course, sees right through it, and he makes another very classy move, rook d3, just forcing the trade of black's only remaining piece, because, as you know, the rook is the only remaining piece in black's position. If I move my rook to, say, c8 or b8, then, of course, rook d7 wins the game instantly. This means that I have to take, and this is actually a pretty comical position. You know, optically, it might seem that black might hold some sort of a fortress here, but again, don't fool yourself. White has a full extra bishop, and I resigned in a few moves. I played f5.
I'm curious, actually, would this position be winning if black could play bishop b7, bishop takes a6, and lose the bishop for one pawn? Probably, but it might be closer.
It's definitely going to be closer. I mean, the fact that the bishop is so buried.
He can't even get a pawn for this bishop.
Yeah, and I mean, there's no calculation really necessary.
But rook takes d3 is sad, but unfortunately, rook d7 is just as bad if you move.
Yeah, so if rook c8, for example, then rook d7, he's going to take that pawn on a7. The game is completely over. So,
yeah. So at this point, there wasn't much to do.
I'm not exactly. Yeah, the bishop on a is really bad. I'm sorry, I played so badly in this game, but I have to live with it. f5, f4, and what's going to be White's kind of obvious plan here of penetration? How is he going to finish me off?
Vadim does not like your moves.
Yeah, no. Come on, guys. Very straightforward plan here. Yeah, exactly. Very good. King just goes to e5. And after king g7, king f3, king f6, king e3, if I allow king d4 and king e5, the game is over. He's going to play bishop c4, takes e6. So I played e5, and Onishuk plays a nice move, bishop c4. e4, king d4, and here I actually resigned. I can probably, I mean, I haven't resigned that many games actually up material when there is no mate coming, but this game is completely over. Among other things, I'm just in Zugzwang. After something like king e5, king e7, king e7, king e5, he's going to take both of my pawns, and then he has a wide choice of winning plans. A pretty amusing one would be to transfer the bishop to b7 via e6 and c8 and b7. And then in addition to that bishop being terrible, black's just going to lose it. So that would not have been a very nice ending, and I decided to resign after king d4. So one thing I want to mention is that I give quite a few of my losses in my video series. This game was definitely very painful for me, but it was also a great learning experience. When I kind of let that move c5 really soak into me, I began to appreciate even more the power of these positionally intuitive decisions. Onishuk made that move in just a few minutes. I'm sure that he didn't calculate up to this point. And during the game, it can be very hard to make a move like this, just giving up a pawn. Psychologically, parting with material in an endgame can be difficult, but using our positional intuition and identifying that key to the position, in this case, the bishop on a8, can really bring a lot of dividends. And so to close, and then I'll pass the mouse back to Sam to present one of the games that'll be in his video series. I just like to say that I really put in maximum effort into this series. I covered a lot of these concepts that I think a lot of people really want to know about, and yet that just don't exist anywhere. They're not spoken about because they're very difficult to tackle. So I don't like to peddle my products, but basically, obviously, that's what we're here for. As Sam mentioned, I'm a destitute college student, and it would really be an honor for, I'm sure, both of us if you made the decision to purchase that series. It's an investment, but I really, really tried to make it worth your while, and here's a link down below for your consideration. So without further ado, whatever you decide, just give it some thought. And I'll pass the mic now and the mouse back to Sam for his game.
We'll close this one. That was a very interesting game from Daniel. And as you said, this is the kind of thing that his series is about. And it's looked to me like it's very interesting. I want to go buy his series and become a better chess player. I hope you guys do too. So yeah, go ahead and buy it. That link is down below. And it will come with my series as well, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. So Daniel was talking about sort of finding the positional ideas. In my series, we're going to talk more, once you've found them, how to execute them in positions where it's a little bit more complicated. So, or complicated tactically as opposed to complicated strategically. So we're going to check out another game. This is another game of Kasparov's, and it's one from a while ago. This was, I believe, the first game he played with Kramnik after losing the match to him. And in that match, Kasparov lost a bunch of games, or he didn't lose a bunch of games in the Berlin, but he was struggling mightily against the Berlin. It was Kramnik's solution to e4, and Kasparov just got nowhere against it. So I'd like to show here where Kasparov came fully prepared for the Berlin, knew the positional ideas, and executed them very well. So just to start out, we're going to begin with the Berlin endgame. And so we'll start a little bit farther down the line. Say something like this. We're a little bit a ways from the critical moment that we're going to get at. But first, I'd like people to come tell me a little bit about what sort of the plan would be. I mean, this is the kind of thing that Daniel's series is more about the non, but like figure out what is White's plan in this position. What move does he really want to achieve? What breakthrough? What kind of this? All these questions. So let's see if anybody can come up with a general sense of how White should be trying to play this position. Come on, people, say something. F5 mobilized pawn. So F5 is a little bit far-fetched, but it's definitely sort of pushing in the right direction because White wants to set his kingside pawn majority in motion, which Bullet Kirsa seems to be saying right. White has a 4 versus 3 pawn majority on the kingside. Another thing to point out here is that Black has the bishop pair, and in particular, the light-squared bishop is unopposed, while White's dark-squared bishop is sort of stuck behind his own pawns. His kingside pawns, like if White were to play f4, his kingside pawns would be blockaded on light squares, and that's really not where he wants them to be. The real thing he would like to achieve is to move e5 to e6. If he can do this, he will remove this blockade on the light squares. He will clear the e5 square for his knight, all these kinds of things. So White's whole game plan should sort of revolve around preparing the move e6 specifically. And, you know, one way to do that would be to play moves f4, g4, f5, sort of like what you guys were saying. But that's going to take a long time. And it's something that Black can have a fair amount of interference with. So Kasparov, or sorry, the game continued rook d8. We're not really at the critical moment yet. Kasparov played rook a d1. In general, I think that Black should probably try to avoid a setup like this one where White is able to play bishop b2 and rook a d1 with Black's king on e8. Normally, he's able to run his king away to c8 and such lines. But this, I suppose, was back then, and the plans in the Berlin game were a bit different. Who knows, maybe tomorrow they'll be different again. So here, I mean, a normal move would be something like bishop e7, but I think this sort of lets white's plan get in motion after g4, because now the black knight has to come to h4, which starts exchanges, and more importantly, it makes it easier for white to maintain this sort of pawn structure on the king side, because h5 is always met with f3. And after something like king g2, h5, f3, white is ready for probably something like knight e2 to f4 next, which will put pressure on the h5 pawn and encourage black to open the h file, potentially prepare e6, and it seems like white's having a good position. So given that this knight on f5 is a bit misplaced, oftentimes in the Berlin, black goes out of maneuver to try to get that knight to a better square. And one very common one is to go knight e7, with the point being that knight g6 will come next. The knight stands quite well on g6 where it can't be harassed. And ultimately, the best square for that knight is e6. So the game continues along relatively normal means. Rook fe1, Kasparov centralizes his pieces very nicely. So now knight g6 is played. White plays knight e4. He probably did not want to allow bishop b4 because white doesn't want to give opposite colored bishops to black. In particular, this light squared bishop would be much better than the dark squared bishop with weak pawn on c2 and stuff. So here, first of all, what Kramnik would love to do is play the move bishop e7 because that develops his pieces. But this move is met with a strong tactical respite. So I'd like everyone to pause their videos, or sorry, not pause your videos, but this is the kind of thing where white has concrete positional ideas here. Trade off the e5 pawn for one of black's pawns. Get rid of the bishop pair, open lines for his pieces, and now he has a way that he can tactically accomplish this. Very good. Knight f6. So this forces black to take the knight, because if black plays king f8 after knight takes d7, he's going to lose an entire piece. So he must play something like f takes, e takes f6, g takes f6, excuse me. And after ef, black is not dead lost here after something like bishop e6, rook takes, rook d8, f takes e7, rook takes d1, rook takes d1, rook g8. Here black will take the e7
Probably
pawn.
rook h7, because now rook d1.
Oh yeah, sorry. So here rook h7 is better. I think we can do a better move order than that. Here black will take the e7 pawn, so he's not just going to get mated, but he's left with an incredibly bad rook. White's bishop on b2, who has been incredibly passive the whole game, is now a monster. And it's funny because white did not win material here, but to me it almost feels like he did.
Yeah, I mean, he can go bishop f6, knight e7, c4, and he's just got black in a complete box.
Yes, there's all sorts. That's one very good way to play. Maybe black can play this a little better. I don't know. Maybe he can start with rook g8 and then takes and play bishop e6 later. I think it's probably more accurate. But nonetheless, it's still a very difficult position. So even after the superior rook g8 takes, and say bishop f6, bishop e6, at least here black got the rook to g8. Still following rook takes and, I don't know, knight d4 or something. Even if white just goes total simplistic and just trades into
the rook ending is really difficult.
Here, black is a very bad position because white has potential to make a pass g-pawn. Black's king side and center pawns are split, while the queen side pawns are highly ineffective. So bishop e7 is the move black would like to play, but it doesn't really work. And it sort of goes back to what I was saying with bishop e7 is, white has a positional idea here. Play knight f6 check to take the bishop on d7 and try off the bishop pair. Your opponent is stopping you from doing so, in this case by having a square under control. What happens if I do it anyway? And in this case, it does not take very much calculation to realize that it actually works. In other examples, you'll have to work a bit harder to make it happen. But in any case, instead of this, black played knight f4. And so his point is, if this knight gets to e6, black's position is golden. He plays bishop e7 next. He doesn't have to worry about knight f6 anymore because the e-file is clogged. And then he can develop his bishop by playing c5 and bishop c6. And black is doing absolutely fine. So, but this sort of drives us back to what one of white's initial positional themes was, which is e6. Now, e6 here is ridiculous because it has no defenders, and black is controlling the square 3 times. But this brings us back to the entire point of this series is, if you have a positional idea, your opponent is preventing you from accomplishing it, the first question you should ask yourself is, what happens if I do it anyway? So what I'd like to do is see if you guys in the audience here can think a bit about the thrust e5, e6, which is obviously a pawn sacrifice. You're clearly not getting that pawn back, but and decide if you think it's a worthwhile move to play. So let's see if we get some voices coming up. Someone says he doesn't like e6. See if anyone does like e6. h4. That seems like it just allows black to do it.
Knight e6, yeah.
Okay, so someone likes it. We've got some different opinions here, but we're going to go ahead and play e6 because that's what Kasparov played.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some calculation behind this move because you're giving up a pawn, you want to hold on to it, but the calculation isn't too hard. So first off, f takes e6 is the easiest one to bust because white simply plays bishop e5, making use of this newly available e5 square. This attacks the knight on f4 as well as the loose pawn on c7. If black were to play knight g6 after simply bishop takes c7 and bishop back to d6, black has an absolutely miserable position. His bishop pair will be gone, and his pawn structure is weak. He can't castle out of it, and I think he's probably going to lose material directly here. So that's reasonably easy. Knight d5, you could say, is a bit more resilient. Nonetheless, after c4, kicking this knight away, the c7 square is once again going to become a point of conquest. So people are saying knight takes e6, and that is indeed the best move. But here we're going to sort of see the point is now this e-file is open and it's very hard for black to develop his pieces. Yeah, so knight takes e6 is what we're going over. In the game, Kasparov played knight d4, which I do think is good enough for an advantage, but he had an even better move in bishop e5, which he correctly noted after the game. So this move carries the threat of bishop takes c7. So if black were to just goof around for a move after bishop takes c7, he's going to lose because following knight takes c7, white is mate with either knight d6 or knight f6 with a discovered double checkmate. So you might say, well, what if black develops his last piece and stops this nonsense? It seems like black's got everything under control. But once again, white has a tactical resource here, and this is something you would ideally have seen before playing e6, because if you don't see it here, then you will not have nearly enough compensation for the pawn. So this is, again, using the concrete tactical variation to justify the positional goal of advancing e5, e6. White has a strong move here. Who can find it? You need more of Garry Kasparov.
Well, here you go.
we're watching him. So. Yes, bishop g7 has been suggested, and this is indeed correct. After bishop takes g7, white is now equalized material, and black's pawn structure has been severely compromised. And the tactical point is after knight takes g7, white plays knight f6 check, white's down a piece for the moment, but following king f8, knight takes d7 check. Material has been equalized. White has traded off the bishop pair, fractured black's pawn on the king side, and traded off the e5 pawn. I think this can be seen as a big success for white. He doesn't win like right away on the spot, but he clearly has a very good position. And after something like king back to e8, let's say check, take this one, and then, I don't know, knight d7 to c5 is probably pretty good. Even knight e5 here is probably pretty good. Yeah. There's all sorts of problems that black is facing. So Kramnik didn't want to do that. The best move would have been rook c8, but now white simply plays knight h4. And it turns out here that black has basically nothing to do because bishop e7 is always met by bishop takes g7. The bishop needs to stay put. Essentially, none of black's pieces can move. The g-pawn is pinned, and even if it wasn't, knight f6 would hurt. f6 always met by bishop takes f6. And white is ready for simply f4 to f5 to just blow open this center.
And you can use your intuition to kind of evaluate this position. It's not, you don't have to go crazy and actually, oh, I'm going to play bishop c5, knight f5, blah, blah, blah. If you notice these ideas, it's enough to sway you toward going for this position.
Right. And calculation helps a lot here too, but you don't actually need to do that much. I mean, if you're talking about bishop c5, knight f5, after bishop c5, white can play knight takes c5. And you don't have to calculate more than that. The same with bishop b4, c3. There's some calculation to, but it's really not that much to justify this positional goal. Maybe that's largely because a lot of this comes with the kind of intuition that Daniel is talking about.
So they're both intertwined, calculation, intuition, and yeah.
Chess is not soccer. In chess, you have to play every position. You don't get to say, oh, I'm a goalkeeper, I don't need to know how to shoot. You have to be able to do everything, and that's why it's important to address all these topics and not just your strengths or your weaknesses. So someone has suggested after bishop e5, black could play bishop b4, but simply c3. This bishop is going to get kicked, and no matter where it goes, it's going to get hit by bishop takes g7. In any case, we're going to move on. Bishop e5 was the best move, but what Kasparov played was fine. Knight d4. Now here black had an interesting try with rook h7, which I don't think quite equalizes, but it's very close. Nonetheless, even for a player of Kramnik's level, finding a move like rook h7 is absurdly difficult. He spent over an hour here and did not play it. So we're going to go ahead and see how the game did play out. So c5 was played. And then white went knight f5. And here, once again, he has these colossal threats on g7. So if black were to waste his time with b6 or something, white has the same tactical resource. Knight takes g7, bishop takes g7, bishop takes g7, and now knight f6 check at the end, again picking up the bishop on d7. And here white actually is winning more material, but it wouldn't even be necessary. There's other moves possible, but none of them really work. So Kramnik tried rook h7 just to defend, overprotect g7 as best he could, but Kasparov came up with another very strong move here that I'd like to see if everyone can try to find. Who all can find what white should play here? Knight takes g7 doesn't quite work here because black does not have to take with the knight on g7. That was the whole point of rook to h7, is that here, at the end of all this, since the knight remains on e6, following knight f6 check, black can hide the king on e7, and here he's in good shape. But this is, so Vadim has found the move. Bishop f6. This is a general positional idea. White wants to kick that active black rook from d8 away from that square, which also leaves the bishop undefended. Bishop f6 is impossible because the pawn is controlling the square, but then that brings me back to the original point of my series. You have a positional goal, in this case bishop f6, to kick the rook away. Your opponent is stopping you from doing so because the pawn is controlling that square. The first question is, what happens if you do it anyway? And here, it takes very little calculation to realize that bishop f6 is fully justified and white is...
Or g takes f6 is a really hard line to calculate, though.
Oh, but after
knight
f6, it's a fork. I'm going to take the rook on h7 and win material.
Oh, dang, yeah.
After the king moves, I'm going to take the rook. Where is that king going to go? Oh, who cares? But so after bishop f6, the rook now has to move away, and now and only now white can pull the trigger on bishop takes g7. f4 may have been even stronger, but I will like bishop takes g7 for its simplicity. The point is, now that the rook is left e8, the exact same line that we were discussing just a moment ago with bishop takes g7, knight takes here. We had this position just a second ago with the rook on d8, and black could play king e7, and he was supporting his position just fine. But unfortunately for him here, now that that rook is left, knight takes d7 is possible. At the end of all this, it's funny because we're looking at all this concrete calculation and all these direct lines. And at the end of all this, all white really did was like get the bishop pair off the board and trade off one of his weaker pawns and fracture black structure a little bit. This game is by no means over, and the computer only even gives white a small advantage. But this is what I really mean by using these concrete tactics to help advance positional goals. And it's something that Kasparov did really, really well in his prime, and in particular, really, really well in this game. And I used it. It's one of the examples in my video series, and there are plenty of others, including all of which were games that made a strong impression on me, either games that I played or games that I saw live or was following live or studied in a lot of detail when I was young. So the rest of this game was definitely interesting, but I do think it's a little bit outside the scope of what I'm hoping to talk about while we're here. So, and it's also coming up on 1 o'clock our time. Actually, I don't know, what time is it in North Korea?
I think it's 11 p.m. It's pretty dark outside already.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So anyhow, greetings from North Korea. It was wonderful to have such an interactive group here. As I've said many times, I don't believe in passive learning, and it's really great that you guys are challenging yourselves to find the moves. I just want to reiterate one last time that this is Sam Shanklin, Daniel Naroditsky here. We're here to promote our respective series, which are now in a bundle, the Shanklin method and the Naroditsky method, for just $79 when they're normally $120 each. But these will teach you how to find all the positional ideas and then how to use tactics to make them work. And
many other things that both of us touch on.
Yes.
It's, it's really a lot of stuff.
And I think anyone who works really hard on these will really see a great improvement in their chess. And I certainly look forward to all the encouraging emails I get saying, oh, I did your series and I improved a lot, because I've already gotten some of those, and those make me genuinely happy to read. So in any case,
Same here.
I'll just leave you guys with the link for the last little bit. And thanks for coming.
Thank you, folks. It's been a pleasure.
We'll see you. I'll be back stateside tomorrow, but Daniel will still be in North Korea giving more webinars tomorrow. Yeah. So just want to say, give you guys a little wave. Goodbye. Great to see you.
Bye.
Please buy our DVDs. If you don't buy them,
we're watching.
We're watching you. All right. Thanks very much, and we will see you guys later. Have a good day.